Hi there, and welcome to this week's edition of Veterans Helping Veterans. My name is Jillian Jans. I'm going to be your host this week. I will be filling in for our usual host, Michael Tellerino, who is unable to join us tonight. I would like to welcome our guests, Wendy Dolan and Alexander Michael, and introduce you to our topic tonight, which is the revisitation of medically induced suicidal ideation. There are a few terms used to describe this condition, but what it boils down to is that an increasing number of patients are experiencing debilitating side effects from the use of certain medications. Side effects that can push an ordinarily non-suicidal person to taking their own life. This is not only a problem for the general public, this is, in fact, hitting veterans and possibly the hardest. The current war that's been going on for nearly 2 decades, it's produced an ever-growing number of veterans needing medical and mental health care, and much of this care is being facilitated through the increased use of pharmaceuticals. And unfortunately, that can cause an onset of painful and dangerous conditions. Wendy Dolan has been our guest before. She is the founder of MIST, an organization dedicated to increasing awareness of the condition known as akathisia, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Alex, as you may know, is an attorney and also a board member for K9s for Veterans. Wendy, last time you were on our show, you introduced us to this condition. Could you quickly recap for us how you became aware of akathisia and its causes?
Sure. So in July of 2010, my husband was experiencing some stress at work and took the antidepressant Paxil. No history of mental illness, no debt, children were completely launched. It was actually a great time in our lives. And 6 days after he started the med, he got up from his desk after a regular client meeting and a regular lunch where he'd made future plans, and got up from his desk and walked to a train station that he would never have taken and ended his life. And several people that I knew who knew this wasn't Stewart did some research, and we found out that there was this underreported adverse drug side effect called akathisia. And when I heard it and looked at the signs and symptoms, I said, my God, this is what happened to Stewart. And so what causes akathisia, and this is what's particularly important to vets, is when and the general public, is that when you stop, start, or change the dosage of any medication, different classes of medication, you need to be aware of side effects, and one such adverse reaction is akathisia. What's particularly disturbing about akathisia is it's not really a traditional suicide, it's more that you want to end how you're feeling. The intense feeling of akathisia, which you'll learn about in this program, the internal feelings and what it looks like externally, is so profound that people want to end the reaction. And in fact, it's often been called the death is a welcome result. So, and what I say overall is if you start any medication and for whatever reason you're taking it for, your symptoms get worse, it might not be you, it may be the medication, and it's time to call your doctor.
Okay, we're going to show you a video produced by MIST that demonstrates what this condition feels like to those suffering with it. And bear with me as I pull this up, guys, because this is my first time doing this. So let's try that and hit the play button and then narrate to you what I'm doing.
Every day, people around the world are prescribed medication. However, in starting, stopping, or changing dosages, especially those for mental health conditions, there can be unexpected side effects.
I couldn't sit still. I was pacing up and down. I was crying.
My mouth felt like it was sucking on a battery.
I felt like I had worms crawling under every inch of my skin.
Side effects that steadily grow more severe until they become unbearable.
I attacked myself with a knife and was hallucinating.
I knew that if I didn't die from it, I would kill myself. It felt like I was being burned alive.
I wanted to die.
It's called akathisia, an intense inner restlessness brought on as a side effect of medication. As many as 5% of patients taking certain medications suffer from akathisia, and for them, the feeling of being unable to stop moving becomes torture. Death can be a welcome result. Unfortunately, many patients and their doctors don't know enough about akathisia. Help us spread the word about akathisia. By learning more about this disorder, we hope to empower those suffering and their loved ones to take action before it's too late. If you or anyone you know is showing signs of akathisia, call your doctor.
Your overhead pages are upside down. Flip them the other way before you turn them.
For more information about akathisia, visit our
She's so
website
good.
at mist.co.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you for watching our video with us. In response to losing your husband, you started this organization as well as pursued a legal case. Could you give a brief explanation of the case and tell us what was the most important part of the court's findings to you?
Well, when I first learned about akathisia and found out that the drug company had known for over 20 years that the drug didn't decrease the risk of suicide, but actually increased it, I became outraged and ended up pursuing a legal case. And it was a pretty difficult road because Stewart was on a generic. And I think what's important for your viewers to know is that 85% of Americans are forced to take generics. But if there's an adverse drug reaction or you die or you're maimed, you have no legal recourse. And what was significant about what happened in Chicago, and I was blessed with having two wonderful judges, Judge Hart and Judge Zagel, is they said, wait, this can't exist. You cannot...
They said it's not okay, essentially.
It's not okay. It's not okay. And they allowed the case to go through. And what was significant to me about this is I won a jury verdict.
Okay.
You know, jury of our peers who listened to 6 weeks of expert witnesses. And I think you asked what was the most important part of the court to me was that jurors actually saw the drug side effects.
Your peers, other people who
were not necessarily as informed as I was.
Who were as equal to you as you could get.
Exactly.
Saw the same thing and agreed and felt the same way.
Yeah, so that to
Okay.
me was what was significant.
Now, Alex, with the jury agreeing with Mr. Dolan's death being a byproduct of the medication, how does this impact future cases? In your
Well,
opinion?
the jury agreeing is one thing, but ultimately we have to discuss what happened next.
Okay.
Which in this case, unfortunately, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals did not agree and reversed the finding.
Okay.
And they essentially held that the generics are not responsible.
So do you think future cases will be inhibited by the court being unable to assign the legal culpability?
The Seventh Circuit's decision will certainly inhibit future cases, and it's certainly a problem in something like this because, I call this a hole in the law.
Okay.
Basically what the law is that a generic cannot be held responsible for failing to label certain warnings because the generic company does not have control over what goes on the label, and so because they are not responsible, they cannot make that change without approval from the major drug company who created the drug.
Who also is not responsible.
Right. Who is also not responsible because they didn't administer the drug in question here. It's not their drug. So
do you think that we're going to see more cases like this in the future, and if so, why?
No, actually, I feel like the Seventh Circuit decision inhibits such cases. I think the solution we have to push for here is we have to push our legislature, our people in Congress.
So by writing to them and
calling them, and having our constituents, call their congressman
so
or
please
woman and
hear that our audience. Make sure that you are reaching out to your congressman and to your Supreme Court, whoever, and any sort of legal people that you can reach out to. That this is an issue that we need to be making sure that this is getting.
That there's got to be a change in the statutory language to allow for some kind of liability against the generic drug maker.
Okay. Wendy, the medical community and the general public have become more aware of this condition. There's actually been a legislation targeted at addressing the issue. Can you tell us about the most recent bill?
Yes. So what I have found the most perplexing is that the vets are killing themselves at the rate of, I think, 20 to 22 now per day.
Yes.
And it's the most highly medicated group of returning vets, and yet they have not been willing to address it, except there was some hope. Last time I was on the show, there was a House bill, H.R. 4640, the Veteran Suicide Prevention Act, which actually was starting to say things like, what drug combinations were they on? You know, what were they diagnosed
You're
for?
referring to the 2015 Clay Hunt?
No, that one. This is
a different one.
This
Okay.
is a different one because we're going to discuss Clay
Clay
Hunt
Hunt,
later. And so this, I was very excited to see this legislation. This was in 2016, but it's
Okay.
continually the status on the Congress is introduced. Then this year there was a new bill called H.R. 100, which took it. I mean, I like the title even better than the other one because it's called Veteran Over Medication and Suicide Prevention Act of 2019, and again stressing the role of medications. Nothing has been done yet that I know. I mean, what I find perplexing is that they keep going around this issue. They're over medicated, and you know. And listen,
They keep passing the buck in a sense.
Yes, and listen, I'm not a vet. You know, I work with vets, but there's many reasons people end their life. You know,
Right.
as a returning vet. But until we're willing to look at the impact of multiple cocktails of medications, unsupervised.
Until all of the responsible parties are willing to take that
Exactly.
kind of responsibility,
Correct.
you can't hold one thing more accountable than another.
Right.
Essentially. Okay, so now there was also the 2015 Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention for American Veterans Act. How is this new bill different from the previous legislation?
Well, from what I read about the Clay Hunt bill, it was they were touting the fact that the VA was going to be having all these new programs for mental health. And it was interesting because one of the things I found so fascinating, and this is a quote, the VA report touts positive outcomes from its suicide prevention programs, but veteran suicide rates haven't slowed. So I found what was interesting about the Clay Hunt bill, of course, there was no mention at all about medication. And while I think, of course, it's important to offer services through the VA, they were still not addressing the role of medication. So what I feel like separated Clay Hunt from these last two congressional bills was there was a willingness to look at medication combos.
Okay, that's a great point. So these acts are targeted at getting the hard numbers of what is happening with veterans seeking help within the VA system. But if the veteran goes to a private doctor or you are just a member of the general public seeking standard health care, neither of these pieces of legislation factor these people in. So while I see the benefit to veterans, doesn't the bill seem somewhat piecemeal or half measure with regards to the scope of the problem?
I think that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, you're right. If you go to a private physician or you are just the general public, you don't know about this. And
A lot of time people, I think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of time I think people too don't hear something until it has some sort of attachment or effect on them.
Correct.
So we could be doing this all day long, and the people who are in these groups aren't going to see it or hear it because
Right.
it's not. Okay.
So here's the thing. I agree that it's piecemeal. It's not the solution. But here's where, you know, I'm going to be hopeful. If the most recent, you know, bill is passed, because it is going to be dealing with veterans and the suicide rate, I'm hoping there'll be a lot of publicity. And because of the publicity, that will then educate the general public. It will hopefully, you know, doctors. I mean, in many ways, the doctors get what's known as a Dear Doctor letter. And each drug company sends a doctor a Dear Doctor letter. And if they've hit this side effect, they're as ignorant as all of us.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, that.
I think people, I'm hoping that because veterans are something that a lot of the common people care about, and
Absolutely.
we're blessed for that, and I'm grateful to the general public for caring about our veterans, and they're grateful to the veterans for doing everything that they've done. That being said, I feel like maybe, hopefully, including them in all of this will make people realize that, hey, wait a second, it's not just them, it's so-and-so that I know too. Maybe
Exactly.
that affects, so I can completely see that. Now, Alex, if pharmaceutical companies are or were aware of this potential problem with medication they produced, what does the liability look like from a legal perspective?
Well, certainly you would like to think that if they are aware of what was going on, that they are liable. But, you know, again, you know, if you're talking about the main producer of the drug, then certainly yes, if that's the medication you're taking. But as Wendy alluded to earlier, 85% of people are taking the generic. And with this hole in the law, you know, it's basically kind of like these pharmaceutical companies who are producing these generics are able to hide behind this, you know, shield that the law has created, and that's a problem.
Well, what legal measures that you're aware of that could be utilized to prevent future problems like these?
Until the law is changed, I don't really see a way of recourse here. Because, having read the precedential decisions by the Seventh Circuit, specifically in Wendy's case with her husband, it does not bode well for future people who suffer these kind of side effects and would be willing to seek legal recourse.
Okay, so essentially what this comes down to is the actionable part of this show. One of the few of them that we have, I would say, is to make sure that you reach out to your legislation however you can. I know that the VFW has a very great legal action core that you can go on, and they have letters written up, like pre-written for you, that you then send to your senator or to whomever, and you just pick the person, you fill in your name, and you send it. And it's a very simple way to start trying to make a difference, because until it's rewritten,
until the law is rewritten correct, we're not going to see a way out of this. So push your legislators, your congressmen to get this law changed.
Okay, now I'm going to very quickly tell you about experience that we had that I'm just going to recap because I know that I've mentioned it before on the show. It was the first show that I was on with my husband, John, when he was put on a medication that was anticonvulsant that they weren't even sure that he needed. It was for seizures that they weren't sure if he was having, but they were trying to prevent something that may or may not have been happening. My feelings on the VA and all those kind of things. But he was put on the medication, and the following day he turned gray. Followed by that night, we had the incident where he had choked me. And the next day was when the doctor called and said, how the medication was going, and I mentioned the skin turning gray, and that's the medication. And then mentioned him choking me. That's a side effect of the medication. We'll just take him off of it. And that was what propelled me to become my husband's caregiver, because somebody had to be held accountable for this. Somebody had to know that this was a problem with medication and he needed to be monitored with medication. He has a traumatic brain injury with no short-term memory, and he's expected to be aware that he's on this. And I look at the paperwork that came with it, and it said that it was a black label medication. Had a black box warning that meant that he could immediately die upon taking this medication, and nobody thought to mention it. So I'm mentioning this so that we could transition into showing you another video of what it's like for the person experiencing it.
Well, let me just state this, that I was honored to meet John at one of the K9s for Veterans events, and I remember how he struck me. In all the places I've spoken all over the world, actually, his story was the most profound, because he told me he experienced akathisia. He didn't say, because one of the definitions of akathisia is it can lead to violence, self-harm, and suicide. And as you shared earlier today, John was not had never laid a finger on you. And I remember him telling me that he had experienced akathisia and was very grateful for the work we were doing, and how fortuitous of this is that turned out to be the person that we're talking about tonight.
Absolutely. And so this video is going to describe what external signs may be present. See, if you are a family member or a friend of a sufferer or emergency services, these are the symptoms that you may encounter. So I'm going to pull up the second video now. Hopefully it goes as smoothly as the first. And narrating it for you again.
Akathisia is an intense inner restlessness brought on as a side effect of medication. As many as 5% of patients taking some medications can suffer from symptoms so severe that it sometimes drives them to violence, self-harm, and suicide. Akathisia typically occurs when a medication is started, stopped, or changed in dosage or type. It is during these changes that it's critical for others to watch for symptoms of akathisia. But as a first responder, medical professional, family member, or friend, how can you identify symptoms of akathisia in a patient or loved one? Visible symptoms to watch out for include rocking back and forth, pacing, marching in place, inability to be still, shifting weight, unusual or violent behavior, Less visible symptoms can include an increase in insomnia, anxiety and agitation, irritability, impulsivity, aggressiveness, hostility, and panic attacks. The following videos were recorded by people suffering from akathisia.
I sleep 1 hour in 24 hours for the last week.
I just want this to stop. This is what it looks like for me a lot of the time. This hurts. It hurts. It hurts.
If the situation is urgent, call emergency personnel or go to the nearest emergency room for help. By recognizing the symptoms at the onset of akathisia, those suffering can be helped before it's too late.
Thank you for watching our second video with us, and hopefully you're able to get out of it what
from both of these videos, you get the internal and external symptoms of akathisia. In response to your question about the general public, Miss puts a lot of time and resources into creating these public service videos so that people are educated. And my greatest dream is that Miss has the resources to actually take out TV slots. September is Suicide Awareness Month, and I would love to be able, but this is, we're only limited by our resources.
And June is Mental Health Awareness Month, so
Correct.
We got an important one coming up here. So if you or anyone you know is experiencing any of these symptoms, please contact your doctor, their doctor immediately. And if you feel that someone you know may be experiencing thoughts of suicide, go to the ER, call emergency services, or call the National Suicide Hotline. There's been a few times in my life where I've been around or near people who have been or were trying to do these things, and I can tell you that intervention is your only option. You're a human being. Save them if you can, please, and do something, because that's what's right. I'm going to put this on the overhead really quick so you can see the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I'm going to also then show you this, which is the Veterans Crisis Line. It's important that you hit 1 with that, okay? Because otherwise you're going to get just taken to the original Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So if you are a veteran, make sure that you follow it with the hitting 1, okay, guys? So that is. This is a hard episode to do. I can tell you that. No wonder Mike wasn't here. I'm kidding. I love you, Mike. If you are a veteran struggling with thoughts of suicide, you can call the Veterans Crisis Line. There's also I'll put it up I'll post it to the K9 site. There's a warrior line that I personally would recommend a little bit more than the VA prevention line, because we had we'll talk about another episode issues with that. But I want to thank the guests, and I want to wrap it up a little bit. Is there any last thoughts that you would like to share, Alex?
I think Wendy covered it all.
Okay, and Wendy?
I'm just grateful for this kind of exposure. I mean, from the minute I met Mike and learned about your organization, it was just really a perfect match. And like you said, who doesn't care about our veterans?
Right.
And this kind of treatment is just unacceptable. And so thank you. And the only thing I'd say is that if you were touched by what we talked about today, go to miss.co and share it with people. That we are an awareness group, and the more people that know, the better it is. I mean, for example, these 2 videos in combination have now 110,000 views.
That's amazing.
So we are getting the word out there. So
that's one of the things that my husband's his nonprofit Cheers to the Warriors wanted to be able to do, was have a number out there so that when these guys are at their last whatever, that they can call and they can get a hold of him or somebody like him, because he's been there. He's been at his last hope, last moments of thinking that they could hang on for that little while longer, and it's it's scary to think that there's nobody out there. It's scary to think that you're alone, and it's scary to think that the people that you love are thinking these things and they don't know that you're there or that there is somebody there, and that's important. But I was really good at reading this episode, so I have some fantastically free 5 minutes of airtime. So what should we talk about, guys?
Well, I think what is based on Miss work is that, I mean, I guess what I'd like to know is how did John get to 18 meds?
Okay.
I mean, I said that to him when I met him, and I'm just curious as his wife and as an observer, like, where do you decide you need 18 instead of 10?
More importantly, where does a doctor think that 18 medications are
You
okay?
should have seen some of the things I read in his files, like from when he was in. Because, I mean, keep in mind, I wasn't actively involved until the end. And this is going to be our last thought, because I have to wrap. But he was not being monitored and not being advocated for, because that's what happens. And that's what I believe my job is as his wife and as a citizen of this country who is able to be privileged to know about and be involved with veterans, is to be advocating for them and be aware of these things and these problems that exist. Because in my opinion, the doctors who he was involved with at that point in time, who were in the military that he was involved with, they weren't doing it. And the people that he was around didn't know about it. And until it came to the point that it came to, that was it. So there was a little bit more to that story, but hopefully we'll talk about it another time. And I want to thank you guys both for being part of the show.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for having us.
And thank you for watching.
Thank